Welcome to the Your Leadership Legacy podcast. My name is Tina Paulus Kraus, and I'm so excited to bring you this next podcast dedicated to you high performers out there who want to reinvent yourself, reinvent your business, maybe your career, all of it. This podcast is all about being dedicated to transformation and being the best possible leader of yourself and others that you can be in order to create a legacy that lives on. Welcome to Your Leadership Legacy. My name is Tina Paulus Kraus. I am the founder and CEO of True You Teams. And here we go. Here we go. Hey, everyone. We are back. We were back quick on that one. We did a half hour on the half hour there. So, hi, Daryl. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. I'm doing well.
Awesome. I have Daryl Tolmich with us today.
Yeah.
Daryl is on our board of advisors for the Global Leadership Academy. And Daryl, you have so many amazing things going on. I can't wait to talk about all the stuff that you've got going on. But before we go there, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about who Daryl is and what you got going on.
All right. I'll start with some of the simplest. I'm a dad. I got two young men that are both grown ups now, David and Satchel. Um, got a twin brother. I'm born and raised in Denver.
Awesome.
I'm back in Colorado now after a lot of traveling over the years. Live
Mhm.
down in Southern Colorado. My partner Shelly and I live together with housemate Eddie, but we have a business together, a bunch of business ventures together, all of us. Um, so just a little bit of all the places actually, and
Yeah.
we'll talk into some of that. But
Yeah. I love that you have all these businesses. It's funny with you because I'm like, I think you do one thing and all of a sudden you say you do something else. I'm like, oh, hey, you do that too. And so tell us a little bit about what was that journey and tell us a little bit about what those businesses look like and what you're creating, like what's your vision?
so my past, it was always in operations driven businesses. Since I was 17 years old, moved out, got a job in a warehouse, and for there it was always operation driven businesses. Up
Yeah.
until just about 4.5 years ago, I walked away from that career
Okay.
to get into transformational leadership work. That was literally a month before COVID and all of that leading up to it. So that was my transition was that year. So some of
Yeah.
the work I'm doing actually is still in that field, developing application software for it. I do coaching for operations driven businesses. And for me, that's a lot of the doing stuff that
Hmm.
that I jump into. Um, the work that I love on the other side of that spectrum is the men's group work that I do and the work Shelly and I do together as a couple with Bonfire River. Um, we do creative work in that space. We're writing fiction stuff together. We're doing. She's an artist, the artwork behind me. So
Hmm.
we pretty much cover the gamut of it on some level, and it's always through a leadership lens, always through a relationship lens, and it's men's work and what we're doing in that.
Gotcha. We weren't on Facebook. We are now.
Oh, oh
We
yeah,
got a promoter on tech. That's how that goes.
gotta love that.
Yeah, I love it. So the transformational leadership, what was it for you? Because I think everybody kind of has a story, right, of how they got into this transformational leadership. So what's your story on what brought you into the work?
So divorce. Divorce was the quick, easy one.
Yeah.
I was living in Phoenix at the time, working. My ex-wife and I were going through some rough patches, and she left and took the kids, took the boys. And I really had to come to Jesus, like, who am I, and who am I choosing to be, and how do I show up, and how can I show up differently for my sons? My ex-wife and I had great arrangement really early on. We're like, no matter what happens, we get to be friends to death. So we stuck by that. But when some of my first transformational lenses were through, what man am I being in the world?
Mm.
And then over the years, it was just work in a silo in a cave. Basically, I moved into an apartment by myself, and I was in a cave doing the work, and it unfolded gradually. And then my partner Shelly had done a ton of her own work on a similar path to divorce. So when we converged, it was who do we get to be as a couple? Who do we get to be for each other? So
Yeah.
the initial step was through divorce. It was through the lens of who am I, taking inventory, trusting that I get to be a different version of me, and then showing up different for the world as a model for other men, model for my sons. some of those pieces of it.
Yeah. Who am I and who do I get to be? Two powerful, powerful questions. Talk to me about how it because you're doing this work, how has that impacted your boys?
And a lot of we had a big blow up last week. You know, I love my youngest because he is emotionally so tied to his emotions. But
Mhm.
really calling me forward, like, you know, God damn you, Dad, how dare you do this, some of the things you did, because that's the man he knew. And one
Mhm.
of the things that
So
was
he's
really,
working through it too, right?
yeah,
Like that's
yeah,
him working through it. That's awesome. Okay.
absolutely. And one thing that was a complete blind spot for me, even in all the men's group work I do, facilitating, leading, coaching, was that he's always been waiting for me to turn back into that guy. No matter
Oh.
how much work I was doing, he was always waiting for that guy to come back home. Right. And that gets to be part of the work I'm constantly doing, is just not being that man showing up. So that
Mm-hmm.
was some of the biggest places it had impact, is being able to hear that, being okay with hearing that,
Mm-hmm.
and not always being in my wounding or victim when hearing that.
Right. So how do you communicate with him? So talk about that process of, because that person, we don't want that person to come back, right? Like we go through this work so we can let that person go and step into who we really know and want to be. So how did you work through that with him?
So a lot of times we get to have really authentic conversations, but more so he gets to have permission to say, Dad, I don't need a coach right now. Dad, I need a
Beautiful.
dad right now. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's a blind spot for me because I'm living the work and I
Mm-hmm.
don't realize I'm sounding like a coach to my son, and I get to
Sure.
shut up and listen. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the indicator sometimes. And I've given him some phrases to use that he can feel supported by, like just saying, stop, can I have a minute? Can you be my dad right now? Some of those
Yeah.
things.
Oh, it's so powerful. I mean, my husband and I find ourselves in that. I mean, there's been several times over the course of the last years, I'm like, so do you want me to be your wife right now or your coach? Like, because I can go either way. I got an answer for both of them, right? Or
Yeah.
whatever, a question for both of them. But it's really, really powerful. My next question is, how do you think that's going to impact them? Because you've done this work with them, because you've given them these tools, how do you think that will impact them as they grow into who they become as adults?
I think the biggest thing for me is understanding that the wounding isn't always the wounding, right? It's the paradox of the wound. I believe I strive to always keep my boys safe from wounding. But when
Mhm.
I think about my own work, I understand that the deepest wounding is the most impactful healing. It's where I know where to put the medicine, how I
Right.
know how to lean and lead. So
Hmm.
I don't have to keep them safe. I'm not here to save them from anything. And I think that when just giving them permission as men to be out there and take their bumps and bruises, be wounded, to
Hmm.
be angry, but not be angry on the people around you.
Right.
I hid it from them for a long time. You know, I have a huge story that I'm not safe, that I'm the Hulk, and then I go wander off into the woods to be the Hulk and not hurt anybody. But what I was inadvertently doing when my boys were really young was teaching them not to be angry, not to feel their anger. And even now, giving them permission. It's okay, feel it. You
Yeah.
know, I can take it, and you don't get to do it everywhere in the world, you
Yeah.
know, but you get to feel it. And what does that feel like? My
Hmm.
dad never asked me, what does that feel like?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. So it really leads us into this conversation of men's healing, which it's super near and dear to my heart because I've seen men, whether it's people that I've coached or people in my family, I've seen that progression and that freedom that gets created when they do the work. And so, talk to us about what your vision is for men's healing in general.
Um, s- Space to be and permission to be in that. Um, so I really resisted quote unquote men's work. I have men in my life that are near and dear to me that are doing the hard men's work. They're in the dojo. They're in the right sword and shield men's work stuff. And I really resisted that because I spent the
Hmm.
first 20 years of my life from the time I was probably 15 to 35, and that's how I solved my problems. And I have a story that I couldn't be that way anymore because
Mm.
it didn't work for me. I didn't need to put up my fists. I didn't need to shove back. I didn't need to take that on. And some men, that is their work, and it gets to be because they're remembering their empowerment, how they can show up. and I get to give them space, and I call this sovereignty within community. I get to be all of me everywhere, but in
Mhm.
order to do that, I get to give them space for that as well. So
Sure.
when I show up to my own quote unquote men's work, it's my feelings and feeling my feelings and being in my beingness and inviting
Mhm.
other men to do the same and understanding I'm at a stage in my life at 53 with young men as my sons that maybe some of the other men in my life aren't. And I get to just model it. Sometimes modeling it is getting it wrong, screwing it up, not being good enough, and all the stories that go with that. But
Mhm.
to just do it in close enough proximity sometimes is enough. And that's why I'm doing the work is having that close enough proximity.
Mhm.
One of the
Yeah.
really huge things for me was I went to France 8 years ago by myself, never traveled, never did the thing. And I stood underneath the Eiffel Tower and I was like, a kid that grows up in my neighborhood isn't supposed to stand here unless they're wearing a
Mm.
uniform. That was my story. Unless I'm wearing a military uniform, I don't stand underneath the Eiffel Tower. And that's when I was like, I get to bring this to other men like me so they don't have that story. They're not in that limitation for themselves.
Mhm.
And then that gives them permission to shift, gives me permission to expand, but I get to do it in proximity and I don't always get it right and I'm not always great at it, but I'm willing
Right.
to be close enough to it to screw it up sometimes too.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not being scared and having that fear of failure. It's about welcoming the failure because when I fail, oh yeah, it's not awesome, but it gets me one step closer to where it is that I really want to be. And we've got this like icky feeling around failure, especially in the workplace is what we're talking about, you know? And so failure, how do you talk to your clients about failure and about how to really change your mindset to failure is actually growth?
It, I did it for me first and then I modeled it for them. And the
Yeah.
thing that moved it for me was I don't do right wrong anymore.
Mhm.
I achieved or I learned. And when I
Love
just
it.
did that little language shift for myself,
Mhm.
I can lean into the screw ups, the getting it wrong, the failures, because I
Mhm.
know that's where all the gold is. I know that's where all the lessons are. But it took me
Mhm.
45 years to get there. And now I want to lend them my 10,000 hours so they don't have to wait until to get there. Right.
Yeah,
So
it's so true.
sometimes
Yeah.
it just is that language shift.
It always, and even just, I mean, I imagine this work in schools, you know, in daycare, for God's sake, right? Like from zero all the way up to however old. Like this is work that I believe is truly going to save the planet. Because when we give men, it's almost like giving people the permission that you can be powerful and loving at the same time.
Yeah.
So talk about that. Like, what does it look like to be powerful and loving at the same time?
The place that I typically start is remembering that we all have the masculine essence and the feminine essence. For me, the masculine generates. It's doing. I go do the thing, go do the thing, go do the thing, right? Go achieve the thing. But from my feminine essence, it's creation energy, it's nurturing energy, and I get to do the dance and the flow
Mhm.
of both of those things. And remembering that when we are in that essence, we're connected to our heart anyway, right? That
Yeah.
the valiant behavior comes from loving and being available to love and showing up to love. And so often, especially in my generation, it was, oh, it's only with romance or only with that physicality that I can point it that direction.
Yeah.
And when I let it radiate from me, it engulfs the people around me that have nothing to do with romance or any of the physical aspect of it. And when I can show up and love a man, say I love you to another man, sometimes it's off-putting in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I have great groups of men around me that we say that to each other. And it's not always easy and it's not always quiet. Sometimes we say it at the top of our lungs. Sometimes we say it when we're in
Yeah.
discourse, but we
Love
make
it.
sure we still hear it from each other so
Mhm.
that it's modeled in that way.
Yeah, so powerful. When you think about GLAW, the Global Leadership Academy, and where we're going with GLAW as a board of advisors. So thank you so much. So grateful for you for being on the board
Mhm.
of advisors. You bring literally a world of expertise to the board. How do you see your vision for where you're going with any of the businesses or all of the businesses, whatever? But how do you see your vision and who you be really supporting GLAW, and what's your vision for GLAW as we move forward?
Community. Like, I cannot get moved off of community in so many ways. Like, all the little things, I love doing those operation stuff, graphs, and all the charts, and my analyzer loves that stuff. But the
Mhm,
stand I don't get moved off of it very easily at all is community.
mhm,
And you hear the word community thrown a lot around lately. And what I want to remind people of is it's not your audience, it's not your email list, it's not your followers. They can be aspects of it, but the community for me is literally a resource. Who do I know and what are they doing? And how do we overlap? How do we intersect? And who do I know that they get to know? And
mhm,
taking it that ripple out, and let me introduce you to somebody. Let me interact with somebody. Who do you know that I get to know?
mm,
Um, because for me, that's the resource we're moving towards as a world, as a society. Is
mhm.
and it's a big full circle, but coming back to realizing how important community can be for all of us.
Yeah, yeah. And what do you like? How does that move us forward? So talk about like, because there's this whole, doing it by yourself, doing it with the community. How does it move us forward from a transformational leadership perspective when we're focused on community?
So for me, I literally surrounded myself 4 years ago when I went through the work for myself. I felt like I got shot out of a cannon at the end of it. And I was in this lonely forest, like, "Oh, where did everybody go?"
Yeah.
And so I start gathering people back up. And I
Mhm,
literally have people in my day-to-day life that are from that space from 4 years ago.
mhm,
And you wouldn't think we had anything in common except for that experience, but we found all these nooks and crannies to have in common, whether
mhm,
it's men's work, whether it's what they're doing in the world to get paid, whether it's having children. There's always an overlap and an intersection. So when we can just remember our sameness and come back to each other in that, we're not
mhm,
arguing over our differences. Most of them I don't know their politics, I don't know their religion. We don't talk about some of that stuff, and that's okay because we talk
totally
about
agree.
our overlap, we talk about our intersection. What can be moved forward when we're shoulder to shoulder, and
Mhm,
not picking who I'm going to stand next to, but picking what's the same about the person I'm already standing next to. And
Yeah.
and, and there's a nuance there that we don't always pay attention to.
Mhm. Yeah, it's powerful. It's super powerful. Community is like when we think about GLA, and Donnies and I have talked about this. It's all about the community because it's about the embodiment, right? So I want you to talk about theory versus embodiment, and we've talked about this a little bit before, so I know you know where I'm going there. But we got a lot of theory in the world, a lot of theory. How do we create embodiment?
Of moving from knowledge to knowingness, and for me,
Mhm.
that's I read a ton of books. When I started school, I'm a twin. So I learned really early on that if I dove into knowledge, it differentiated me. What I knew was different than what my brother knew. So I'd read, 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 read.
Got it.
And I was always stuck between my ears because I said, "Oh, that's where I keep all my knowledge. That's where the library is." And it
Yeah.
wasn't until I went down the path of embodiment work and feeling my feelings that I realized that most of my information is actually processed in my heart or my belly and not between my ears. And that's a knowingness.
Mm,
I remember an experience and it comes back. When that song comes on the radio, my brain don't go look up the lyrics. My belly goes, remember that how that felt in that car that day, or when you kiss that girl to that song, or right.
mm,
And then you start accessing information differently and you remember, and there's this knowingness inside of you that books get rewritten all the time, movies get remade, but the knowingness inside of me doesn't shift. Um,
mhm.
I say that memories are imagination thrown backwards instead of forward. And and
Interesting.
and when I can come to that, I was like, that's a vibration inside of me that's much different.
Yeah.
And
Say that
and
again. Say it again and tell us why.
so for me, memories are imagination thrown backwards instead of forward. When I use my imagination forward, I can think of how the great the future is going to be. But a
Amazing.
memory behind me is just using my imagination to remember a thing.
Yep.
Um, and that's when I come back into my body. And as men, we don't always give each other permission to go there. We don't always access information that way. We want it
Mhm.
to be analytical. We want it to be fact checking. We want it to be black and white. because that's how we keep the world safe, our world safe.
Right.
And when we give each other permission to have embodied knowing, we come from a different place. We hug different, we talk different, we show up for each other differently.
Yeah. Beautiful. So if I'm out there and I'm listening to you and maybe I'm a man and I'm like, ooh, I'm interested in this. Talk about, I would love like, what can somebody do? Like if I'm listening to this and I'm like, I get what he's saying, but I don't know what knowingness feels like, right? Like what's the first step that somebody can take if they really want to head down a journey to explore this, but they're just not sure where to start?
For themselves, I would tell them to start with one of their senses. What does something sound like? What does something taste like? Because then you'll remember that you actually have access to all of this. I can give you a book to read and say, hey, I wrote this book. I wrote this great paragraph chapter on this. But the minute you close your eyes, you put on your headphones and you listen to a song, that information is in your body differently, and you'll actually react to it differently and retrieve it differently.
Yeah.
So I tell people, start there. I don't care which of your senses, we all gravitate to some version of it. Go there and remember that for yourself.
Yeah.
Because
I
now
love
you're
that.
you're open to possibility. Now you're open to me even having a conversation with you or creating a connection with you.
Yeah. And when we talk about change, I mean, what's coming up for me is it's that embodiment, the cellular, like change. That's why Global Leadership Experience is 4 months long, because it takes 4 months to really embody a new way of being, right? Because there's a practice and everything else that goes with it. So, so that's it, it's really amazing. Where can people find you, Daryl?
Easiest way to find me is bonfireriver.com. It's our coaching business. Through that is Heart of a Brave, which is my men's group. I'm wrapping up the first cohort right now, literally this week. And then we're relaunching Tantamas, which is our virtual community for a lot of this work. It's the next level, I believe, of what we've all done together. We want it to be reimagined leadership, reimagined transformation. We think everybody has these tools, and we're like, all right, let's disassemble it and see what else it wants to be. So there's a group of us relaunching that in October. But all of that is what you can find on our website, or reach out to us through that website, and we'll connect you with that.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Very grateful for
Absolutely.
you. You know, I want to acknowledge you for just being the powerful stance that you are, not only for the Global Leadership Academy, but just in life and in general. It's just really an honor to have you on the board of advisors, and just looking forward to everything that we're going to build. It's going to be amazing.
Thank you. It was a pleasure doing this with you, Tina. Always.
Always, always. All right. All right, everyone. That's it. We'll be back.
My name is Tina Paulus Kraus, and I thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. Check out our programs and events at trueyouteams.com. And until next time, make it an amazing day.